Hi, friends. This is Laura coming to you from the future. You're about to hear our interview with CM Caplan on The Diplomacy of the Knife, Book 2 in their Four of Mercies series. Just wanted to clarify that at the beginning of the episode, Hannah and I say that the book is being released on a Tuesday. The Diplomacy of the Knife comes out on February 20th, so if you're listening to this episode on February 20th, The Diplomacy of the Knife is out. So be sure to pick it up or request it at your local library. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to our pod. And by that, I mean on Wednesdays we read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are usually two best friends who do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But it's a Tuesday and we didn't watch any TV. So
There's
that
no
means
television.
we're three best friends because we are welcoming to the pod CM Caplan, an author whose book just came out today, The Diplomacy of the Knife. Welcome, Connor.
Hi, it's always really great to be here.
Well, we had you back on when you released your first book, or, during the release of your first book, The Fall Is All There Is. So we were so excited to get you back on to talk about the sequel. So can you tell us a little bit about this series overall, the first book and as well as The Diplomacy of the Knife?
Yeah, the first book, The Fall Is All There Is about Peter Marcy, the youngest, in a set of royal quadruplets, as the death of his father sort of creates a political instability that each of his siblings are trying to exploit. Book one ends with him being put in charge of the palace guard, as his sister and his oldest brother are oldest in air quotes, one like a minute apart from him, are at each other's throats and trying to like start a war, or they have started a war for succession. And then book two sort of picks up where that left off.
And this book is so action-packed.
It is
so
intense. I was going to say welcome and also how dare you, because
Did you get to the end?
yes.
Yeah.
Because I just
Sorry about that.
I finished the book this morning and I was like, excuse me?
Yeah.
What?
First of all, how dare you?
Yeah.
We're going to make you answer
Second
for
of all,
this.
How dare you?
Yeah.
Quite
the
rude
Yeah,
of
I
you.
deserve that. Yeah.
We're recording a couple days ahead. There's still time to change it if you wanted to.
Oh yeah. You know?
Feel free to add some more chapters.
I thought about it. I thought about like, oh, should I provide any more sort of like information, like maybe like a nicer, safer cliffhanger or anything? And then I was like, no, this is gonna make everyone so mad. This is gonna be so good.
You've kind of like hinted about this though, like on social media, like, oh, readers are gonna be so mad at me. And I've
Yeah.
commented a couple times, like, I'm nervous. Like, what are you gonna do?
Mhm.
And you did it.
Yeah.
So here we are. But this was actually an awesome sequel. Like Hannah said, it was really action packed and I feel like the vibe was a little bit different than the first book. And Hannah and I both were like texting each other about it. And I was like, I feel like Connor's writing has changed a little bit. And so, what was it like writing this sequel and kind of this experience with this second book compared to the first?
The first, I've heard a lot of the feedback I get about the first is that it's a lot more sort of intense. Peter's narration is a lot, is much more sort of evocative in every single line than this one. This one is a bit of a smoother read. And I think part of the reason book one ended up that way is I had just written The Sword in the Street, and that one I liked the book. I liked how The Sword in the Street ended up, but I felt like I could do more. So book one was really me trying to prove myself in a way. And that it was a period where I was sort of like trying to figure out what kind of a writer I wanted to be, and so there was a lot of like I'm taking a lot of big swings, whereas this one was sort of by the time I got to book two, I was like, all right, I'm confident in what I can do and what I have written down and everything, and I knew how it was going to end like almost as soon as book one was published. I remember sitting in like a little Starbucks cafe, waiting for my fiance to get out of work and trying to figure out what the ending of book two was going to be, and I immediately I figured out the ending, texted Crystal Matar, and Crystal Matar was just sort of like, "You're gonna make everyone so angry if you end it there." And I
She's
was like,
like,
"All
you
right,
better
then I'm gonna
delete
end
your
it there."
socials
She
now.
called it.
Yeah. And so like the rest of it was basically like trying to backtrack my way to the right way to get to that ending. So I wrote like seven different versions of events
Oh
that
my
are
gosh.
wildly different. It's not the same, but there's like seven different 50,000 word versions of book two that just ended up on the cutting room floor because I kept having to retry it. And, like part of the reason was like I fucked myself with the ending of book one because I didn't have any idea what Peter would do as being in charge of the guard and everything. Um,
Turns out a lot of what he did before, but
yeah,
Yeah,
different
yeah.
energy.
basically, yeah,
He's a very volatile person, and you would think you can't figure him out, but you can a little bit.
yeah. So a lot of book two ended up basically being like trying to figure out ways in which I could demonstrate how unreliable he is as a narrator because he's constantly positioning himself as different from his family, and he's really
Mhm.
not. He's
No.
really not at all different. He just had a change of scenery and thought that was enough to really just sort of make him a different person.
I really liked that though, that in this book you get, because like in the first book, we are really in his head, and he is like, I'm so different. I just want everyone. And we talked about how he's unreliable in the last book, but in this one, you really see like he is just like all of them. Like he does the same
Yeah,
stuff they do. And like everyone is constantly calling him out, like, you are not different than us. You are just the same spoiled brat the rest of us are. And
yeah,
he's like, but like I could be different, right? And I think in this book you get to see him come to terms with the fact that like, no, he isn't that different. And I really loved that.
yeah. That's part of why I think part of the reason I think it reads as a bit faster, a bit cleaner is like because I book one there was a lot of setup of Peter's internal narration and he doesn't know like half of what's going on, whereas with this one we're off and away, we're immediately exploring everything that was set up, so it's like everything goes by so quickly and it's all in service of basically being like this is everything Peter has right now and I'm going to systematically deprive him of all of it
I,
until
I
he
do feel
learns
like
his lesson.
I do feel like we still in this book to get like a lot of that like internal narration, almost like the cutaways that you get in movies where it's like, oh, and here's how I got here, where we're like looking at the person where it's like frozen screen, and
Yeah.
I
Hi,
bet
it's
you're
me. I
wondering
bet you're
how this
wondering how.
happened.
Yeah,
You
And
do
exactly.
so many moments of like, you would think I'd learn from this, but I won't. And it's like
I
this
love
jump
that.
back moment. It was so unique. I loved reading it every time it happened.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. But when you're talking about like the similarities that the siblings have, they're constantly like finding themselves connected to each other, either through like things that they try to plan out or through fate or like just their general like knowledge and experiences with each other. What would you say is like one of the main things that like keeps bringing them back together?
I think part of the thing that pushes them together is like there's no one else who can really wrap their brains around what it's like to have this just absolutely obscene amount of power that no human should ever really be given. And then the rest of the world is almost pushing them together in the same way, because of like there's like the media, there's the people in power around them are constantly sort of like trying to view them as reflections of the other, which is there's a bit of personal experience there as a fellow
Well, yeah,
quadruplet.
yeah.
And
And
so
you talk
they're
about birth order
constantly.
and stuff too, which is kind of fascinating because like you said, like you wouldn't think that birth order would play that much into it considering they're only like a minute apart in
Oh
age.
yeah, yeah,
So
that's actually one of the
so like
things.
how do you think that kind of shapes the characters as well, considering that they are literally about the same age?
Hmm. That was one of the things that I really was excited to get into because that's something that a lot of people don't realize about like being a quadruplet. A lot of people think like the hierarchy isn't necessarily fully established, but it's really there are a lot of areas where it'll show up where it's like there's just like different things where like when I'm going to talk about myself for a minute instead of the book, but it's basically like when I was growing up, like we would like on birthdays we'd open it in birth order, and then and like on Christmas we'd do it in reverse and everything, and there was constantly sort of like ordering us, like positioning us just about our lives in various sort of ways. We were oriented towards birth order in a weird way. I was born first, so for some reason, like people kept sort of like would just assume I was in some sort of leadership position of the rest of my siblings in various times. Not constantly, but just every now and then it would creep into the way someone interacted and be like, oh, this one must be the one in charge. I'm like, no, I have biggest, youngest sibling energy. I have
You're the
very like,
Edgar.
yeah, I, I very much, I come across to most people like the youngest sibling, I think, with this constant need for attention. Otherwise, I wouldn't be writing these books.
As a
Um,
youngest sibling, I have no idea what you're talking about. I didn't say I have extreme main character energy just earlier today.
yeah, there's a lot of that, a lot of main character energy. I like the way you put that.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I think youngest are very much like, well, it's all about me. And it's like, no,
yeah,
it's really
exactly.
not,
I
but you
told
think
my
it
younger
is.
sister that she has main
Yes.
character energy, and then after I explained what main character energy is to her, I was like, it means like you're the person that everyone focuses on, like you're the main character in a movie. And she's like, yes, I am.
Yeah, correct. Yes. I'm a Gemini. Of course I am.
Well, I do like what you said though about like how you get treated as some type of role in leadership. Because I know in the last book you said you struggled a little bit with Anoise as a character, but in this book
Yeah.
she kind of comes to the forefront and she was kind of like
Hmm.
the standout character, at least for me as I read it, because you got to see what it was like for society and for the parents to kind of put her in that leadership role. And I don't think we explored that because in the last book it was all like Edgar being like, well, I'm more liked, so I should be in charge. And we
Yeah.
just kind of heard like, oh, Eloise is this, or this. We heard a lot about her, but in this book, we hear so much more depth to her character, whether it's like learning that like her mom made her watch like open heart surgery when she was 5, or her dad took her and Edgar on these like more dangerous missions. And I feel like you expanded her character so much. So what was it like to kind of explore her as like the oldest child and all of her like inner machinations in this book?
That bit was incredibly fun. That was because like that was she was one of the few characters that I was like I need to flesh her out more because everyone else sort of you really get their vibe, whereas Eloise in book one is very sort of like she, especially with Peter playing things close to the vest because she's been so
Mm.
vulnerable with him earlier in life and everything, and this was basically it took a while to get her to open up like as a character, even to like because I didn't know much about what she was going to be like in a lot of ways, that I had to sort of like construct the right sort of framework to get her to open up. I had to like write a bunch of stuff from her point of view to finally sort of figure out how her head works. um and it was really fun. A lot of the rhetoric stuff was where I finally sort of figured out how to get her to really shine, where it's like Peter's trying to introduce a point, but then he realizes there's a sort of power dynamic that wasn't there when they were growing up, where she's technically in charge of him now, and
Mhm.
instead of an outright confrontation, she'll like say something that will suggest something that she thinks he believes, and he has to respond to it, and it's like, will I respond in a way? Will my response indicate that I actually do believe this thing? And this, like, she's constantly rhetorically boxing him into a corner and everything. And that was really refreshing from like the version of her you see in book one, where she's allowed to sort of like, she's allowed to get some like shots in more than she did in book one, where she was more sort of reserved and trying to assess things before moving. And now she's like, well, we're fucked, so I might as well make some hard moves now.
She definitely seems to have like this like desperation though, and this like
Hmm.
deep-seated sadness that
Yeah.
she really just covers up with like this strong front and kind of being tough and kind of like assuming that other people are going to just kind of cave because she is who she is. And
Hmm.
it seems like it would make her a really effective leader, and it does in a lot of ways, but I feel like there's also ways that this seems to have kind of corrupted her a bit and like the path that she's going on towards her own victory. What would you say is like some of the I don't want to say like negative aspects of like her as a character, but maybe more like, are there warning signs for this character as well? Because I feel like I'm at a point where I don't know who to trust out of any of
Laura
them.
is asking you to hold her hand and tell her who to love in this book
Well,
series.
kind of a little bit because it's the characters are all so gray that especially in Anois, it feels like we're getting more depth to the character and everything, but at the same time, I'm a little concerned like with some of the glimmers of what's happening with the character. Like, is this something that we need to be afraid about, or what's gonna happen here?
The thing about Hannah as a character is I think she desperately sort of wants to be her dad, in a
Mm,
way, but while simultaneously hating everything that he's really sort of done to her in the position he put her in before he died and everything. And so she's constantly has this sort of tension to her of like wanting to be the kind of ruler her dad was while knowing exactly how evil ruling like that would be. Um, and you see her emulate him in a lot of different ways throughout the book of like trying to sort of channel like the she knows it works for him to yell until he gets what he wants, so she tries doing that as well. But like there's this almost naivete about the way she's going about things where she doesn't necessarily fully clock that like the circumstances here are not going to are not going to work for her the same as they worked for her dad for like a variety of reasons. Um, like even just the fact that her siblings constantly sort of like mistake the fact that because they're siblings, they're on the same sort of power level.
mhm.
And she constantly is trying to fight back against that. Um, and I think that's part of why she does a lot of the things she does, especially towards the end.
Hmm.
That there's a lot of that. If you're looking for who to love in this book, it's probably going to be Afram.
No one.
That's fair.
I
I
I will make a promise to you now. He's never going to betray Peter.
Oh, that's good to know because it was a fear actually.
I
So
mean, it got a little concerning, but
yeah. Well, I do think like there is so much to Annalise in this book because like she is a woman who's firstborn. So like there is that
Hmm.
expectation that she is supposed to be the queen in her mind. But then you have Edgar come in who like I really liked Edgar in the first book, and you did a good job of just like trouncing any love I had for that man.
he's
Because
awful.
Oh,
in that first book, he's like, I just want to be loved and I just love you, Peter, so much. And I just want you to be your best. I'm like, oh, he actually had like really bad underlying tendencies to like think that what he knew about Peter was best. And he's very controlling. And like, I really
hmm.
loved the moment where Peter, confronts Edgar and he's like, you were born like not that long before me. What makes you special? And like there
Literally, yes.
it's a moment that you could almost see like Edgar has like almost a moment of clarity, and then he's like, I'm not gonna have clarity. I'm actually just gonna
Right?
move
Yeah,
on and
no,
think you're
literally.
terrible.
Yeah.
So I just think you did such an effective job at working with these people and showing like each of them as layered human beings who are gray and like the naivete in all of them. Because like
Mhm.
Peter has a moment with his friend where he's like, hey, you need to speak to your subjects because you can't just pretend that these people are less important than you because like they
Yeah.
matter. And then later Pierre says the same thing to Annalise, but like he doesn't believe it.
Right, exactly. He's not doing it either.
Yeah. So you did such a good job of showing like these are just very spoiled children playing like the games of politics.
Yeah. With
Something that's
Edgar.
like really.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead.
No, okay, with Edgar, especially, that was if any of the four of them were going to have a podcast, it would be him.
I
He's
mean,
he's like the epitome of a white man who just thinks that because like he's socially popular, he's like I can just figure out whatever I can figure out how to
people
solve
want to listen
everything.
to him.
What was that?
People want to listen to him.
Yeah. Yeah, he's the kind of guy he thinks that because he's like smart and charismatic and interesting, he can do anything, and then he gets power and he's like, "What the fuck did I do? Oh no!
Well,
I
you
don't know how any of this works."
You did say in the first book, like you originally had intended to have him be like some like Machiavellian force behind everything, and he
Yeah.
wasn't really the main focus. I feel like you got the opportunity to do that in this book, where he like kind of pops in and out, but a lot of times he's not like as brought into the story. Was that something you got to like? Did you get to reuse any of the storylines from the first book where he was like more behind the scenes, or was this just something where you're like, oh, naturally this makes sense?
I got to use just shockingly little from
Oh
what I remember
no.
from the initial version of things. Um, it's that like a lot of it came about incidentally as I was trying to figure out what the actual book needed to be. Where it's like a lot of it was reverse engineered, where it's like, okay, I know I have this set piece that would work really well, and that would really be nice to include in this thing, and then trying to if this character has this plot line going, and that's something they're scheming, how could that connect to a potential plan and everything. Um, and it all came about almost organically in a sense where it's like I didn't know that this was going to be the underlying plan until like I'd been writing it for like a year and a half or something like that. Um, and it was a lot of it was I almost went in a completely different direction until I realized like because there's a thing that happens about a third of the way through the book. Or not even a third, like most of the way, halfway through, like part one, basically, there's a big sort of moment where the rug gets pulled out from under someone, and that almost didn't happen because I thought it was a plot hole. Or because for the first time, like Peter's put in charge as a guard, he has to root out all of these traitors, and in most for like a full year of writing this, um, I had um. I had this thing where I thought he was just gonna successfully root them out, and then this other stuff was gonna happen, and then I was like, but wait, like why, if these people are in these positions, why don't they do this thing? And I was like, I'll figure that out later. I'll paper over that plot hole, and then I realized, like, wait a minute, wait, it would be actually really cool if these people did this thing, and then all of this catastrophe happens, and that's actually, and then that was when things started to click into place of, oh, okay, I know what this needs to be, I know how to build it, and then the first third actually was the last thing I wrote, where that's the part where I think Edgar is the most behind the scenes, where it's like you don't know what his plans are, but like it's gonna make sense in retrospect what he's building and everything. Um, that was the bit where I was just sort of like, okay, I know what happens in the rest of the book, but now I need to actually build it and make it look like Edgar knew what he was doing the whole time.
He's
That's
like really
awesome.
ruthless and despicable, honestly.
Hmm.
Like we get to this point where we're just like a little bit disgusted by him. Like
Yeah.
and I think it's like Hannah said, it's very effective in a villain. But what I think is like fascinating is that because we're in Peter's brain, we get these like moments where Peter's like, "Oh, damn you, that was good," and he really admires him, honestly, for some of
Yeah.
his. He admires his strategies and stuff. So I was just kind of wondering, like, what qualities you find the most admirable about Edgar.
I There's a lot of my own brother in him. Not like the crueler kind of things. The things that I think I would say I admire about Edgar, are the things that he has in common with my own brother, and that he's a very charming, charismatic person, and he's willing to do these very sort of like bold things, to get the things that he wants and everything. Um, and I think those are some really admirable qualities where it's like it's if he's like bored in a situation, he wants to be doing something else, he's gonna go and do that. And he's not gonna like, he's basically the opposite of Peter in a lot of ways that I think Peter wishes he could be like. Now I'm sounding like I'm using this as a proxy to talk about my relationship with my own brother. I promise that there's like
If he's like on a boat somewhere and he's planning out the demise of many people,
oh yeah, this was a warning. This would be like I should never get on a boat with my own brother. No, but I think to hone in on specifically Edgar and Peter's relationship, this does not apply. I'm gonna be very clear about that. Peter wishes he could be a lot like Edgar because Edgar doesn't need to stop and think things through in the same way
Mm.
that Peter does. And Peter wishes a lot that he could do that and make the decisive moves that his brother makes and be as comfortable in a leadership position as Edgar is in a lot of ways. And I think Peter ends up really admiring these things about him while also being like, he knows that he wishes he could be like that, but also he knows Edgar is completely unqualified to have the level of power that he actually does. And so these two, it's like it's if you could get them, one of the things that's really tragic is if you could get these two to get along and actually talk to each other, I feel like they could hammer out some really good sort of policies and everything, but they're too busy at each other's throats to actually do anything useful.
It's
yeah.
really funny because in this book, I find myself like thinking like, who is Peter's favorite sibling? Because I think if you ask Edgar, it would be Peter. Like I think Peter is actually the sibling he loves most. And then
Hmm.
like I also think he's probably Anoisa's favorite brother, but I don't know who he loves the most. And I think like that's always interesting to look at, like who loves each of the, because I feel like there's different
Yeah,
favorites as you go on in life. And I think that
yeah.
plugs into a little bit of the complexity with Edgar and Peter, that Edgar, I think, does genuinely love Peter, but he's like overreacting because they all left him alone in the sandbox because he was being a dick. So,
Yeah, that's basically a lot of their relationships. Is like, because like when Peter was a kid, his Anna Weeds was really fond of him and everything, and they
mhm.
were getting along really well. But then every now and then something would happen, and they would be at each other's throat, and then he'd be like cozying up to a different sibling, and that part comes from experience. That part is like I had moments in my life where I would like just could not stand one sister and was like really cozy with like my brother, and then there would be points where I couldn't stand my brother, and I was just like, I will always get along with this sister. And I kept thinking that was going to be the dynamic throughout my whole life, but it's just constantly changed.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like beyond even just like their relationships with each other, like Peter has really expanded as a character in general. And I just find him fascinating because, like you said, he is like constantly thinking like all these things. And we get that glimpse of that. But I relate to that because I feel like my brain never shuts off. I'm always thinking like five things at the same time. And it's so interesting. But I feel like we can notice these changes in Peter where it's like he seems to have grown a little bit in like empathy and his ability to navigate situations. And I just find that really like refreshing that this character is able to in such tense moments do those type of things. But I feel like we've talked about the other characters too that are making like big steps and are probably being forced into this considering situations that are going on in the world. But who would you say is like growing the most and achieving their goals the most out of the siblings?
That's a good question. Um, Growing the most and achieving their goals the most is going to be two different
Yes.
answers. Um, Growing the most, I'd say Desmond. Desmond is
Mm,
very much, he doesn't get as much of a starring role as he did in book one because a lot of his growth was in book one of just realizing he needs to like be able to communicate with Peter in a lot of ways and like just and acknowledging like the ways that he was shafted in ways that Peter wasn't and just being Desmond and Peter in book one were both very paranoid and distrustful of each other, and a lot of book one was them learning to let that guard down. And I think that's why Peter's a bit sort of smoother as like a character. He's less paranoid in this one. He's still paranoid, but like less so this time.
Mhm.
And I think Desmond had a very similar journey of like he's less paranoid this time, and he's learned to apply a lot of his skill set in a bit of a more measured way. In terms of who's getting the things that they want, that's probably going to be Edgar. Although it's debatable how much of that is Edgar and how much of that is the people around Edgar. He has like having a good set of people around him
Yeah,
advising him
he's
on
got a
what to
great
do.
team.
Yeah,
yeah.
he's got a great sort of cabinet put together, or high
Hmm.
council, or whatever sort of fantasy term you want for that.
Well, and it feels like Edgar, it's such a specific motivation where you're like, yeah, he would be the guy with the podcast because he really wants his family to think he's qualified. And they're all
Yeah,
sitting there like, well, we're never going to think that. And he's like, well, maybe if I'm the one in power, you guys will finally admit it. And they're all like, no, we still don't think that you deserve it.
right. Yeah, no,
But he
literally.
thinks he's so deserving is the
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah.
So it's wild.
It's a lot like Elon Musk in a way where it's like Elon Musk has that relationship to comedy where it's like he can buy so many things, but he can't make people think he's funny, even if he
Yeah,
thinks he's hilarious.
he should have just started a podcast. That's what Laura and I did to think we were funny. So
You know, I hear it works for a lot of people.
exactly. Well, I will say that, like, again, I did really like Edgar in the first book. And in this book, there are certain moments that the people around him are doing things that actually I go on the record a lot that I really have a problem with seeing cruelty in books. It
Hmm.
makes me physically uncomfortable. Your book made me physically uncomfortable during
I'm so
like the
sorry.
twist at the end of part one. No, that's what it's supposed
Hmm.
to do. But I think you did such an effective job at like making the tension among like sibling dynamics and like being double crossed. And it was like uncomfortable to sit in that strife. So, like, what was it like writing that? Because for me, I felt uncomfortable.
Um, which section of the book was this?
The section the right before the end of part one, where everything's kind of going to hell in a handbasket.
Oh yeah.
Like,
So how was it writing that? That was it took so many different tries to get that bit right. Like the first attempt had like Peter and Avram navigating everything sort of together, and then eventually I was like, no, it's not going to work. It's going to be too crowded. He needs a moment to just sort of have to. Peter needs a moment to sort of step up. And just, like take some initiative. He needs a moment to feel like this despair here, and then some like initially the big like a big rescue in the sort of the hall where he's trying to keep people out. Um, I'm trying not to spoil things too much.
yeah,
Initially,
no,
initially it's Fabian who goes there, who meets up instead of Mercedes, and I had to switch that around because I was like, well, I feel like Mercedes needs more time to be endeared to the character. She almost never showed up in the original draft of book two. I needed more sort of times to endear her to the audience and
Mm.
everything. Every character is constantly shifting around to try and get to that to try and build to like the most emotional impact that this scene is going to have for that character. It took like forever to actually like figure out the right sequence of events to hit the right emotional beats. An incredibly complex like set piece with a bunch of moving
Right.
pieces. Yeah, and it took ages. And The final bit where the sword fight towards the end of that sequence was one of the last scenes I wrote where it's like, wait a minute, wait, oh, they can all converge here, and that's gonna be delicious. I didn't realize I had that opportunity until I had built the rest, and then that was just like this missing piece. It's like I have a very specific shape that's not that to complete this puzzle, and where oh perfect, I have this weird shaped thing that could fit right here at the end of the scene. And a lot of the visceral the cruelty aspect of it was really just I'm trying to figure out how to describe it. A lot of it was like I needed Peter to be at his lowest point for a lot of the sequence. I needed it to just feel completely desperate and then just have him trying to resolve it anyway. Um, and OCD is really helpful with that. I get a lot of weird intrusive thoughts, and then I'm like, no, hang on, how would that feel? Let's really dig into that.
It
Um,
felt awful, just so you know.
yeah, I figured. That's part of the thing, especially when writing violence. One of the things that turns me off from a book more than anything else is writing violence, the kind of violence that really makes you stand up and go like, "Fuck yeah, yeah, this is great. This is like watching the Super Bowl." Like it's that kind of stuff. There's like a place for that. I'm not saying that anyone's doing something wrong like an ethical level, but like if you're trying to write a book that is like taking itself and the themes you're writing very seriously, and you're writing about violence, I feel like I want to wince a little bit. I should not be kind
Mhm.
of feeling like this is glorious. I want to, if when I personally am trying to write about violence, I like to make sure that like every time I write a scene where there's a fight in these books, it's like it's gonna be about as effective as throwing a grenade at a problem.
Yeah.
Because that's I think that's usually what violence is like in most situations. Is like it's basically about as effective as like you're gonna throw a grenade at the thing that's giving you a problem. It could work. It could pay off really well for you depending on the problem that you have. But like it's still a grenade. It could go any number of ways. It could ricochet and then land like right at your feet, and then you're fucked. That's part of the way that I try to approach a lot of those scenes where it's like I need anyone reading it to feel that kind of wince. I don't want anyone for a minute to be laboring under the delusion that this is a sort of fuck yeah, this is awesome bit.
Yeah. That's awesome. It was
Yeah,
very
I
effective.
yeah, I was gonna say I don't know that anyone's reading this like, oh yay, this happened. Like,
Yeah.
so I think you did your job. You did it correctly. But it's interesting that you mentioned that like you kind of like wrote your way into this like a surprise. Were there any other moments or specific scenes in book two that you were kind of surprised by the way that they turned out, or that you found yourself writing them in such a way?
Um, most of them.
Most of them?
Most of the big set pieces I didn't know were going to be in there until like probably like early 2024. I spent a year basically. It was changing so much that I was just trying to sub in various set pieces that I had on like on file or whatever. Like, I had a room in the back with a bunch of set pieces that I could go like a wheel out and be like, maybe this is something. The bit with the ship and the heartbeat engine and everything
Oh,
that was originally a novella, when that
Oh,
was set when Peter was 18 with a gang of pirates. And then I was like, this eventually there was enough stuff changed that I was like, I can never use this because it wouldn't work with like the timeline and the setup didn't work with Peter on a character level. And if I introduced it, it would completely change who he was as a character. And I was like, but I love this scene and this like heart surgery thing and everything. That's such a cool concept. So that was one of the things that was. I guess that's now that I think about it, it's kind of the opposite of a surprise, in that like it kept working its way back into the book, and I try and take it out and replace it with something else, but it would be like, well, now I have nothing for this because I know I'm not
You
gonna
had
have.
hinted at that scene in our last interview. You were
Yeah.
like, "Oh, there's going to be a scene, and they're going to be over a gangplank," and I was
Yeah,
like, "Oh,
Hmm.
he right back in, or they put it right back in." So
yeah, yeah. That was one of the things. Like I kept it took forever to figure out how it was gonna go down, but I knew I wanted that there. Um, but there were so many. There was a version where Avram was the one doing the heart surgery. There was a completely different person that Peter was fighting on like the gangplank and everything. And it was like there's different versions of that. But I always knew it was going to be there. Um, a lot of the stuff with Annalise and Peter in the third part was definitely that was probably the biggest surprise. Everything with Annalise there, I did not know that was going to happen until that stuff was written like 6 months ago. I didn't know that was coming at all.
I honestly, I felt a little shocked by it too.
Hmm.
Like it seemed like some of the characters, like Hannah mentioned earlier, like yeah, like Peter does a lot of the things that we would expect him to do. Like there's
Hmm.
some of these things that like the characters kind of fall into like predictable trends, really. But Annalise' story was one that I was like, okay, this is honestly a little bit shocking, and that's why I like asked you earlier, like, do we need to be afraid? Because I don't know what's happening with this character.
Yeah, with her, I think her storyline was the most delightful to write for me, which is kind of evil to say, but like, because her, like, I basically knew the broad strokes of how every other character was basically going to end up by the end of this book. But she was like a black box for me. I didn't know how that was going to go. And it was only like while sort of trying to figure out what kind of a character she was going to be in this book that a lot of these pieces came together. But that final piece that I'm really trying not to spoil and trying to figure out how to get into this without really sharing what happens. But it's like um, I think part of the reason she does what she does is like she's been trained for so long that and it's just been so fully inculcated in her that she deserves to have this power and she needs to have this power for like the good of everything that when it gets threatened, like she's a lot like the rest of her siblings. There's a lot she's gonna do to get it back.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So someone we do get to see again in this book is their mom.
Yeah. Oh
She's
yeah,
the
you sure
worst.
do.
She's the worst.
Oh man.
At first, I was like, "Oh, this is actually a fairly interesting character." Then we get further, and I'm like, "God, I hate her."
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, we hated her in the last book too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember
Hmm.
there was a
I
moment where
try
Laura was
really hard
like,
to
I
like
tried
villains.
to be sympathetic to her, and then I'm just like, nope, can't do it. Not for me.
Yeah. Hmm.
I
So
try hard to be like, "Oh, villains have reasons for the way they
Yeah.
become a certain way," and then I'm
I
just like,
think
"No,
I do think you
you're
tell us
awful."
in a really effective way, like what her journey was and what her motivations are. Like she is a
Yeah.
person who has been stuck in a basement. Like she has a lot. And at one point, she says something to Peter that like broke my heart, even though I really hate this person. She's
Hmm.
like, I'm about to turn 40. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she's only 40. And like she has
Yeah.
these adult children and she's
Hmm.
stuck in a basement. Like, and and I do love a moment, like there's a moment where you know that she has feelings, but she also is like, my feelings are not enough to get over my trauma. And I'm like, you know what? I'm glad that there like a person like this exists
Mhm.
in a book because I feel like we're told a lot in books like love should conquer all. And it's like sometimes it doesn't though. Sometimes
Yeah.
love is
Sometimes
not
you just become a
enough.
bit of an asshole.
Yeah, like because guess what? You're stuck in the basement and you don't get to see the daylight, and that is rough. So can you tell us a little bit more about like about their mom and what it's like kind of creating that character?
His mom is one of my favorite characters, just full stop, that I've ever written. Because his mom is so easy to hate, and also and like mostly because I like a lot of the reason that happens is because Peter's doing a lot of the work for you. Like Peter cannot stand this woman to the point where like he mentions her backstory up front of like she's raped at 17 and stuck in a
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
basement when she tries to get out of her situation, and then just sort of glosses over that on like page 8 of book 1, and then it goes back to anyway, I hate this fucking bitch. God, and like it's like what the fuck, bro, dude. But then like at the same time, like she's threatening to sew people's mouths shut and is doing like showing her daughter like heart surgery and shit, and just being a horrible person. But at the same time, it's like I wouldn't be turning out pretty great if I was in her situation either.
No.
It's that's what makes her so compelling to me is like she's a blast to write because she's just given up on giving a fuck about any of
Mhm.
this, and wants to present a very sort of stoic version of herself to a lot of these people, but she's just in such a tremendous amount of pain, and is just willing to go to the ends of the earth to just sort of to get some sense of payback or justice for what she's been through.
Yeah.
And she has very sympathetic motivations while not being a
Yeah.
particularly sympathetic character.
I mean,
And
Yes.
that was a
bad
tough
things
to
can
really
happen to shitty people too. I think that
right.
that's
Yep.
always the like motivation of, you know what? It's not always going to be the perfect martyr who this happens to. Sometimes bad things
Yeah.
happen to bad people. Like,
I have a teaser for book three. I'm not going to give too much away, but she is going to factor in. The same way that Anna-Louise factors in like the big. This was her big book to really have to
mhm.
really have this focus of like this is what her journey is going to be. If everything goes according to plan, book three is going to be like that for Peter's mom.
Oh,
Oh
perfect.
my
Can't
gosh.
wait to be so mad at her for the entire
I'm so
book.
nervous now.
It's gonna do some weird. I'm going to be doing some weird stuff with your emotions and feelings towards her, probably.
Well, because I think you do a good job at that with everyone, though, because like there are so many moments with the siblings where, like, because we're in Peter's perspective, I'm almost always on board with his feelings, but I'm also like,
Hmm.
and you're unreliable. So I'm guessing there's
Right.
so much more
Exactly.
going on.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and
but
like getting back to like what I had mentioned earlier about like the trust, like as a reader not being able to trust other people, but the characters can't trust each other either. Like even like their own family, and it's something that Peter's like struggles with. And this is like such a complicated situation where they need alliances and everything, and their trust in one another often lets them down, and
mhm.
Yeah.
in horrifying ways. So what's it like developing a series where the characters are forced to take like huge risks in terms of their alliances? And do you see like certain alliances becoming stronger or remaining more in a grayer area like they kind of are now, where it's like, oh yeah, we're in an alliance until maybe 2 p.m. and then we're not in an alliance anymore?
Oh, that's actually a really good question. The process of writing it is always very tricky because, like, in order for it to mean anything, it needs to have these very clear stakes. But if you can't trust the person standing next to you to honor their agreement and everything, it really muddies the stakes and everything. It's very difficult to build that kind of uncertainty in a way that feels natural or realistic without being like, I don't know what's going on. Like, that's that part I think was very difficult. And part of the reason that's difficult is because of the amount of power that these characters have. And until they're willing to either come at things in a different angle, um, it's probably going to be a lot of the same. That's I think the closest I can get towards explaining how a lot of that's going to develop without spoiling anything.
That's fair. That's
So
fair.
this discussion has been heavy on characters because Laura and I love a
Hmm.
deep dark character, and you did such a good job of creating like a million of them for us to
Yeah.
dive into. But this world is also incredibly unique. And last book, we had meat trees and we had mechanical horses, but you had even more expansive world building. So can you tell the listeners what they can expect to see in this book when it comes to the world building and how you expanded this your creation?
There's gonna be a whole list of stuff. There's a thing called nerve cars, which are basically motorcycles that run on nerve endings and spinal fluid.
Which I need
There's
to know more about that because as I'm reading, I'm like, how can this possibly work? How do they maintain these? Like, this is
I
amazing.
honestly, I a lot of the world building is basically throwing something out and basically being like, "You see this? How do you think it works?" And just hoping the reader sort of like the way that I was able to explain nerve cars was basically being like, "Well, if they're gonna run, there's gonna need some sort of electricity, and I needed something in the human body that could probably theoretically suggest it generates electricity. I'm not a scientist. If a scientist reads this, I'm probably fucked." But I was just like, all right, so nerve endings and probably like spinal fluid probably helps with with how a lot of the way that nerves sort of communicate with each other. So we'll throw that into an
They need
engine
lubrication.
and just yeah, exactly. And then it just goes. Um and then just if that doesn't work scientifically, we'll just say it's magic. There's some magic involved in it as well that I can't explain. There's There's obviously the swords with the batteries of human thyroid. There's the
Mhm.
train had a brief appearance in book one, but has a whole set piece in book two. It was originally not as big of a set piece, and then Kristen Matar read it and said, "I need a whole Mad Max sequence while they're on the train." And I was like, "Oh, absolutely, you're so right. I can't believe I didn't write that earlier."
What a great
Um,
suggestion.
yeah, that was so it's a train that's got like these lizard scales and buffalo fur and like steel and just and weird plasma windows and everything, and it's just this weird Frankenstein of a train. There's the ships that are made of like oil and blood and steel and fossilized bones and everything. The bones of these giant sort of like prehistoric fish are provide the structure for these ships, and then they have an engine that's made of a gigantic human heart, and then there's a certain sequence where they're running on like a really shitty version of one of those that needs like injections of beta blockers to continue
Yeah.
to run. I'm trying to think if there's any other big things that I could point to. Um, I don't think there's any new ones or at
I
least
mean, there are
beyond
a
those.
couple I can think of. One might be spoilery, but the other one is hilarious and awesome that you included, and it was Mr. Squeak.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah, that was fun. Yeah.
I wonder where we've heard that name before.
Sarah
Mr.
made me
Squeak
put
Daily.
literally Sarah made me put uh pugs in book one at least. I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna have a chance to name a pug, but I'm gonna have uh I think that initially came about because I was living at Sarah's house for like several months in 2022 when I was writing this book. And she was like, "You should have like a pug in this book." And I was like, "Where would I put a pug in this book? This is a pretty breakneck pace. I can't stop for a pug." And then eventually, I think I was remembering a bit in the Lion in Winter, the 1960s movie. There's just a lot of dogs just roaming about the castle, and I was like, I could just put security cameras in one eye and just sort of do that, and that's how they have security. And then I was
Perfect.
like, I spent so many times trying to put Mr. Squeak in some version of this book, and she kept popping up in random sort of scenes throughout as I tried to find a spot for her. And then I finally, once I knew the general shape of things, I was like, I'll just put her in the beginning right here.
Well, it's absolutely hilarious too because it's just like her name is Mr. Squeak. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's
Well, and
great.
for listeners who don't know, one of our sister podcast, Fiction Fans, the one of the hosts, Sarah, has a dog named Mr. Squeak, who is a
Adorable.
very snory little girl pug, and
Well, and
she's
Mhm.
Snorri is the
Oh yeah, you're right.
other pug.
so it was very exciting to see Mr. Squeak get a shout
Yeah,
out in this
it's
book.
Yes.
great. I
I also
might tr
thought it was cool too, though, like how the book included like some history in terms of like there's a moment where there's a play enacting some of
Mm.
the history of the world. And so I thought it was kind of neat that you included some of the lore and the history of the world in that way too, because we're kind of seeing like these mirrors of each other as the plot plays out and how that play is going on, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that was fun. This is the second book where I included a play and then in hushed tones that was basically the same play that I wrote in The Sword in the Street a
Hmm.
little bit.
That's
Um,
amazing.
um, but yeah, I really liked I needed that was mostly done because I needed more scenes for Mercedes, and I was like, there's gonna be like I knew there was gonna be a sex scene in that bit, but I was just sort of like, where do I set this? Because I can't just have her go to like her bedroom. That's not
That's
exciting
not
enough.
public enough.
Yeah,
It
it's
That's
needs
not
not
to be
public
more
enough.
public.
I did want to make fun of Laura a little bit because she's not a huge spice reader, and I'm like, ooh, you had like public spice in this book.
I'm
yeah,
genuinely
that
not bothered like reading spice. I just feel like I don't do it very often. So,
that's fair. Like you don't seek it out, but if it comes
no.
to you, then
Yeah, I don't have a problem.
that's
If it
fair.
comes to you during a play.
Right. Oh man. Yeah, it's like it took because originally he just went to her bedroom and they talked and I was like, this is nothing. This is not exciting enough. I need like much like Peter, I need to turn this up to 11.
I mean, it
Let's
adds
put
more
him in
tension
exactly.
to
You
their
put him
whole
in a situation where
situation.
they're not supposed to be talking or doing anything and
Hmm.
then make them unhinged.
It was excellent.
Yeah. That
Well,
was fun.
Connor, can you tell everyone where we can find you and your books online?
You can find me on Bluesky. I'm on Instagram. I'm technically, theoretically on Threads, but I don't check. I have a Facebook page as well, and you can find the books on Amazon. And book one is on Audible. Book two, there's no audiobook in the immediate future, at least that I'm aware of. So only book one on Audible, and then you can find book two on Amazon.
And listeners, you need to be checking out The Fall Is All There Is and The Diplomacy of the Knife. Excellent, excellent books.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And Connor, this is a quartet,
I
the
think
four
it's going
book
to be a
series.
trilogy.
Trilogy? Okay.
I've mentioned before. I'm gonna I need to change the series title because it says Four of Mercies, but which does not make it clear. I need to add like the Four of Mercies trilogy or something like that. Because so many people think it's going to be a quartet. It could be
Well, then
if
with
book
the
three ends up being long,
quadruplets.
but
I mean, I just told you that I thought it should be a quartet because there were four siblings, but
Yeah,
that
that's
absolutely.
was,
kind of
I
what I thought too,
stand
like
by that. But
quadruplets, but
also,
I
can you tell us a little bit about your covers? Because I feel like we
yes.
would be remiss not to bring those up because they are beautiful. These are amazing.
yeah, I got Faye Lane to do them. Faye Lane did Crystal Matar's covers for the hardcovers.
Hmm.
And I couldn't get the person who did the initial cover for book one to do book two, so I was like, well, I don't want them to be have that sort of mismatch. A lot of people like that consistency.
Hmm.
So I reached out to that person, and it was an incredible process of just like list a bunch of stuff that you think would go well on this cover, give me some themes and everything, and then just she created just the most gorgeous things I've ever seen.
They're so good. I loved them.
Diplomacy is like awesome. I really love that cover.
Yeah,
I can just look at that
yeah,
cover for days. Every time I
Yeah.
open it, I'm like, oh, it's so pretty.
it's so good.
uh, and for our listeners, can you tell us something you're reading, watching, and or enjoying right now?
Um, I am reading one of my first like not hard R, capital R romance novels. Um, that was not the right one. That was the wrong turn of phrase. Capital R romance novels. Um, it's Quenby Olson told me to read it because we might be co-writing something in the future that might
Oh.
be romance. It's called Lord of Scoundrels. It's like from the 90s, and
Oh.
just it's the most delicious romance of like this like Italian man who's got like this social standing as like a reprobate and everything, and like trying to seduce this woman of high society, but also he doesn't want to go after her because he only goes after like whores and everything, and she can't tame me and things like that. And it's just
He's
this
a
delicious.
rake.
Yes, yeah, that's the term I'm looking for. Yeah, and then she is not supposed to be into him, but she's super into him. And there's a lot of tension there, and I have not, as someone who's not read a ton of romance, I was shocked at how good this is. I mean, I know romance is like really really good and everything, and I've sort of I've never really I'd bounced off a couple earlier in my life, but I this is just they're taking the most simple premise and they're making it just the most incredible thing you've ever seen. It's rife with tension and just I adore it so much. I didn't expect to adore it as much as I am. It's great.
That's
Love
amazing. I love
it.
when you can like discover a new interest or love like
Yeah,
that.
a new genre sort of thing where it's like, oh, I bounced
Hmm.
off a lot of these, but this one, wow, this is really good.
Yes, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
Connor,
well,
thank you so much for coming and talking with us today.
and everyone go get Connor's books, The Diplomacy of the Knife, out today.
Today,
So make sure
Yeah.
you're getting that because these books are amazing. They're some of my
yes.
favorites. So, Connor, thank you for coming on. As always, you are welcome back anytime. And if listeners, you know where to find us. You can follow us at OWWR Pod on all platforms and join us tomorrow for our regularly scheduled programming. Thank you so much, Connor. Again, we appreciate you.
And have a
Yeah,
good
Bye.
thank you for having me.
Of course. Bye.
bye.